Thank you. And welcome.
Thank you.
Khare. I invite you to tell us a little about yourself and how you began and advanced your career, particularly in transitioning from service to India to service to the globe.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Rafaelides. It is a pleasure to be here in Fairleigh Dickinson University, which has a long-standing collaboration with the United Nations, and I deeply appreciate that. For the benefit of the students, I am sure, I hope you know that your university was the first to be granted consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, which is a very important status. Coming back to myself, and I want to go back much into history, nearly, say, 40 years, 45 years ago. I started my education after school as an engineer. I wanted to be an engineer. I wanted to build things. I wanted to do many other things. But then I realized that engineering does not work because people are not healthy. So you can try to construct many things. If people are not healthy, it doesn't work. So I decided to become a doctor. Luckily, I was selected. I became a doctor, but by the time I finished my medical education, I realized that there is a problem with medicine also. You can keep on giving medicine for every small illness, but till you correct the underlying problem of inequality, till you correct the underlying problem of lack of sanitation, lack of clean water, a proper governance structure, which has now been recognized in the Sustainable Development Goals, you can look at it, you will reach nowhere. You can keep on giving individual medicine, so individuals will get corrected, but then they will fall sick again. And then others will fall sick, and they will keep on falling sick. It doesn't solve the problem. It just generates business for medicine. So I shifted into diplomacy, or rather politics. But then I realized somewhere along the line that working for your country sometimes divorces you. I think you should be true to your country, no doubt about that. But you should be able to look at humanity as one. You should be able to rise above the challenges of your country alone, or your state alone, or your village alone, or your township alone, to feel for the world, because ultimately this is the only world that we have, as far as I know. So in that regard, I decided to join the UN, and one of the early areas where I got involved was peacekeeping. Though I was involved earlier also with economic and social development, with UNDP, with UNICEF, our sister agencies who work for children, who work for general issues of development, along with World Bank, IMF, and others. But I thought that in peacekeeping, there were three reasons why I got involved with peacekeeping. First reason was, if you are trying to find the most deprived, the most vulnerable, the most in challenging situations, where are you going to find them? You are going to find them where governance is not there, where rule of law does not exist, where there is insecurity, and this also leads where there is insecurity. Obviously, there is no clean water, there is no doctor, there is no proper sanitation, and so on and so forth. So you have to do peacekeeping. What is peacekeeping? Peacekeeping, if I were to use a medical analogy, is the bandage which we put on top of people when they get burns or when they get a cut. But bandage does not heal. Healing is done by the body, by medicines, by care. So peacekeeping in itself cannot produce results. Peacekeeping provides a certain outside intervention to give you stability and to give other actors who will actually improve the country, generally the actors of the country themselves, the national authorities, to have that breathing space of 2 to 5 years to deal with the challenge. And luckily at the time when I got involved with peacekeeping, that was the time when we had many successes, which I can talk to you later on. But I mention one of them at this stage, which is Cambodia. In fact, in Cambodia, The head of the mission at that time in 1992-93 was a dear old colleague of mine, much senior to me. His name was Akashi. And Akashi was also, he got involved with the UN in a very peculiar fashion. And I want to mention it to you because I have brought with me my colleague in my department, Miss Kelly Fleck. Some of you who like can speak to her later on. He was studying, he was a Japanese, of course. He was studying in Columbia University for his master's degree in 1950. At that point of time, there were not many Japanese who were working in the UN. In the UN, we want to have people from every country properly represented. So one day he came sort of just to look at the UN, what the UN is, and he was observed by the then Undersecretary General for Political Affairs, who asked him that if he would be interested in joining as an intern. So he joined as an intern, and then later on, of course, he became a UN officer, and in the end, in 1992-93, he became the head of this mission. In Cambodia, it was called UN Transitional Administration. So not only it was peacekeeping mission, actually it was exercising all the authorities which any government would exercise. And that was a fairly successful mission because as you see now in Cambodia, we no longer have peacekeeping, the country, okay, it has not converted itself into United States of America, but that is not the objective of peacekeeping. The objective of peacekeeping is to ensure that the countries are securely anchored on the path of democracy, security, lack of violence, and development. But it is not to convert everything into California. That cannot happen. And I think that success invigorated me to look at peacekeeping. I think we can talk later, Professor Sam, in both the challenges, the positives, the negatives, where we need to do even more, where we need help from academics, from people like you. But as I said, with my history, I hope that you will also get encouraged to think of UN as one of your contributions, either during your study period or post your study period.
Oh, thank you. You speak of successes, and Cambodia certainly is one. Can you define, or what defines success in peacekeeping and enforcement?
I think I'll keep peace enforcement separately because I'll deal with it. There, actually, United Nations doesn't really do peace enforcement. It either is a transitional administration when it takes on all the responsibilities, and I'll come to that, 3-4 areas, or it does peacekeeping, or it supports peace enforcement. My current department, Department of Operational Support, supports non-UN entities, African Union, which is doing peace enforcement in Somalia. And I will come to that in a short while. But let's look at first peacekeeping. What defines success in peacekeeping? I think success in peacekeeping should be defined more as what I would call process initiatives. Let me give you one example. In rule of law, we want countries where rule of law has completely disappeared, because that is when you need peacekeeping. We want the rule of law to return. But we cannot count it that 50 judges are there in the Supreme Court. No. Let's take an example. Supposing if there are no lawyers, so you need somebody to finish a master's, that is 4 years maybe after schooling. Then you need them to finish a law degree, a juris doctorate, another 4 years, 8 years. Then you need some experience for them to become properly trained advocates, another 4 or 5 years, so 13 years. Then you need some experience as a district court judge, as a high court judge, count another 10 years for that, 25 years. But 25 years, we are not going to remain in peacekeeping, that's not an option. What we need to define is that the country has got on the path to development. That means there is a university which is teaching law. There are people who are taking up law. The countrymen are believers in law, particularly the top leadership. I'll give you an example from my experience as head of mission, and I was also a transitional administrator in Timor-Leste, which was the last transitional administration that the UN had. My president at that time of that country was a Nobel Peace Prize winner, Jose Ramos Horta. And that was the day when I decided that I could leave, actually, after nearly 3 years as in peacekeeping. His younger brother had a car accident, and a young child died in that car accident. It happened in the night. I was responsible for peace, security, for police, for defense. So I gave him a call on the mobile. I said, look, yeah, this has happened. What is your view? I mean, of course, I'll take my decision, but I want to incorporate you because transition administration doesn't mean, even if you had normal administration, you have to consult with the people. So I consulted with him. And he said he should be put in jail. That is what he did to his own brother. Then I said that, okay, now this country is securely anchored. It is not yet there. It will take time for proper courts to be developed, but it is there because the leaders believe in the rule of law, even when it comes to their own blood relations. And of course, now, as you know, we no longer have a peacekeeping operation in Timor-Leste. I will talk about that success later on. Second area of success, let me again give you another example, that we have a functioning parliament. Why do we want a functioning parliament? We want a functioning parliament because there are two types of peace in the world, according to my interpretation. One is the peace of the symmetry, where nothing changes, bodies are buried, there is always peace, but it cannot improve. It cannot degenerate also, but it cannot improve also. The second is the peace which leads to development. And peace which leads to development means that people must have different opinions, but they must be able to resolve their differences of views through a process of discussion, mutual respect, through a process of elections, through a process in the parliament, where the opposition, the government have their say. And these different opinions do not degenerate into street fighting, into killing each other, into ethnic problems. So that is why I believe that properly conducted national elections, twice or thrice at least, properly functioning parliaments are important. And I say properly conducted doesn't mean I have always been against seeking perfection in elections. I can understand. For example, I tell you, I conducted the first national election in Timor-Leste, where at the end of it, many observers, outside observers, they came and gave me a big report saying 160 prisoners were denied the right of vote. I said, yes, okay, sorry. We can look at it next time. The question for me was, even if this 160 had the vote, would it have made a difference to the result or not? And the result was such that 160 would not have made a difference. So that means we need to have elections whose results are widely accepted, are upheld, lead to proper government, proper opposition, and are such that while we can keep on improving the electoral process, but we should not search for perfect election. Perfect election exists nowhere. The third area where I think we need to be very clear about is what I would call the country being placed on the path of economic and social development, but with care for the weakest, not care for the strongest. Because many countries you will find there are elites who, when their country becomes difficult, they leave, they have the ability to leave, they go to Europe, they come to America, they go elsewhere, and then when the country becomes somewhat stable, they return back. And then they seek what I would call rentier behavior, for want of a better term. That is not development, You have to take care of those people who are the weakest of the weak. If people are committed to that, I think we are on the right path. So these are three broad areas which I would give as benchmarks for improvement. And that is why on these benchmarks, our peacekeeping operation in Democratic Republic of Congo still has a long way to go, even though we have been there in that big country for nearly 60 years. We lost a Secretary General in doing peacekeeping in Democratic Republic of Congo. This was Dag Hammarskjöld, whose plane crashed, which we are still trying to investigate, what actually happened. But on the other hand, as we see, we took in Timor-Leste about roughly 10 years, 2002 to 2012, with a short interregnum in between. But from 12 to 19, it's all right. It is a normal country. Again, as I said, it has not become a rich country. It has not become a developed country. It's still a developing country. It is still a half island. But it has at least 24-hour electricity. It has at least proper medical care. It has proper primary education for everybody. And it has a reasonably good university for people who want to go to university. I think that's fair enough. Then they will continue on that path. Similarly, I would give you examples of Latin American countries. Sometimes we forget, Today, most of the peacekeeping operations are to be found in Africa. But 20 years ago, they were not in Africa. They were in Latin America, in Costa Rica, in Guatemala, in Nicaragua, and most of them were reasonably stable and successful for a period of time, I would say. Costa Rica, in fact, I think is the best example. We decided actually even to abolish its army. But on the other hand, in Haiti, we are still having challenges, despite being there for nearly decades and decades. Why? Because the rentier behavior in Haiti is very high. There is a big difference between what I would call the rich and the poor. I'm not saying that we should abolish all differences, because sometimes it is also useful to have good examples for which others can aspire to. But at the same point of time, I think we do need, somebody was mentioning to me corporate social responsibility in this discussion during the reception period, and I think we need to have a certain degree of social conscience which has to be developed. Another area which I would want also to be included in the factor of success is regional cooperation, because no country exists in isolation. You cannot solve the problem in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo till you have cooperation from Rwanda, Uganda, Burundi, to mention only three, but also Sudan, South Sudan, and DRC is critical for Africa. You have to realize that it is the large, in fact, in terms of size, we think of Democratic Republic of Congo. Democratic Republic of Congo geographically is as big as Europe. So I think we need to keep on thinking of the regional context. So these are four critical success elements which I would want to define for success. For example, let's take Cambodia. In Cambodia, the success factors were determined by strong cooperation between Vietnam and Thailand, the two neighbors on the two sides. In Timor-Leste, again, we had a very good regional cooperation between Indonesia, which has half of the island. Timor-Leste is only half of an island. The other half of the island is Kupang, or Atambua, which is the capital of Kupang. And then Australia on the other side, across the Timor Sea. And of course, support from Portuguese-speaking countries, Brazil, Portugal, and others. So that also worked out well. But where we do not have enough regional cooperation, then there is a challenge. So these are four critical success elements which I would define at this stage.
Obviously, the neighborhood is a very important factor. Does this encourage working with the regional organizations like the African Union, for example?
Absolutely. I think my own department supports African Union in many ways, and I will go into some of them. First and foremost, I think we need to realize that there are certain abilities which regional organizations can bring which outsiders would find difficult to cultivate. I speak Wolof because of my stay in Senegal. I can differentiate a Pearl from a Wolof, a Bambara of Mali from a Pearl. Uh, but I cannot really differentiate, if you like, a, uh, a Swahili Ethiopian from a say Botswanian, uh, because I have not lived there. But those who have lived there, they know what it is. You have to realize that when we are peacekeeping, traditional peacekeeping was between member states. Peacekeeping has evolved. Let me give you that evolution in 2 minutes, and then I'll come to my argument. Initially, peacekeeping was unarmed military observers between two countries on the border, observing the two countries and both countries respecting them. Uh, what were they observing? They were not observing terrorists, they were not observing guerrilla, they didn't exist. They were observing well uniformed, so you could make out, okay, this was a major, this was a colonel, this was a major general, doing some work, and both were wearing uniforms of their country, they had written their names, whatever their countries were. So that was the original concept of peacekeeping. From there, we went into a concept of peacekeeping which was called transitional administration, which I told you, Cambodia, Timor-Leste, but also Namibia, where my good friend Mati Atisiri was the SRHG, later on would become the president of his country, Finland, very well respected in Namibia, led to the independence of Namibia with Sam Nujoma and helped him. Then from transitional administration, we shifted partly in Timor-Leste, but also in former Yugoslavia, to what I would like to call state building, assisting in police development and so on. Now we have shifted to what we call protection of civilians. But who are harming the civilians? They are the drug traffickers, they are the terrorists, they are the rebel groups, but the rebel groups don't wear a uniform. They don't put on their forehead, I am ADF. How will you find out they are ADF? If you cannot differentiate between a Rwandan and a DRC person, So I think there are some areas where regional organizations take precedence. How shall we cooperate with them? We tried many ways. Initially, my former Department of Field Support, which I used to head, we thought that the regional organizations lack resources. So let's create a trust fund. We'll manage the trust fund. We'll give them the money which comes in the trust fund, and they can do the work. This we tried in Mali. We tried in Central African Republic. They were the first responders. But this didn't really work out well, because the problem is not only resources, and I'll come to it, what we are trying to change. Then second, we tried, okay, let's try a hybrid operation. Two of us joined together. This is Darfur, which is our UN mission, UN and African mission. So that's why it's called UNAMID, UN and African mission in Darfur, in Sudan. To some extent, it was better than the trust fund, but I think still did not serve the full purpose. So now we have realized that there are three things which we need to do. We need to build the capacity of the regional organizations, and therefore now, for example, African Union, up till now, 9 exchanges have taken place. There are officers from African Union who come and work inside my department as my employees, reporting to me for 3 months. And for the same period, I send UN employees to African Union in Addis Ababa to work as African Union employees under the control of the chairperson, Dr. Faki Mehmet, and reporting to him for that period. So by this exchange program, we call it KEEP, Knowledge and Experience Exchange Program. So we actually improve the capacities of both organizations to understand each other and develop the capacities of both. We also provide them joint training. We also provide them with my department purchases equipment for the world over, for whatever UN needs. That's why it's called operational support, be it human resources, be it equipment, be it services. When we purchase, it's very interesting. Let me try and give you an example. You want to purchase a SUV, you cannot go to to say if you're purchasing from Toyota, you cannot go to the board of Toyota to purchase. I mean, they will sell you. Go to the retailer. No, retailer is there. They will sell. They will sell it to you for close to $48,000, which is the normal price. I also don't go to the chairman of the board. Why? Because the board comes to me. Because I purchase in the range of 1,000, 2,000 vehicles a year. For me, the price per vehicle is $28,000. I will not pay more than that because there are volume discounts. So African Union cannot get volume discount. So we have made available our systems contracts to African Union. Piggyback on us, buy cheap, use it. We are also doing joint trainings with them. And more importantly, we are now trying an experiment in Somalia where the African Union provides the military through Uganda, Sierra Leone, Ethiopia, Kenya, Nigeria, and Burundi. And we provide all the logistical support, so we have sort of divided our work and we are working together. But yes, I agree that we need to do more with the regional organizations because without regional organizations, even if you say, that, okay, we will speak French, so that is what we will look for, in our people when we are trying to select people for Democratic Republic of Congo. But when we send them to Bukavu, when we send them to Goma, when we send them to Bunia, when we send them to, say, Tanganyika, French is useless. French only gives you access to the elite. It gives you no access whatsoever below the elite, And really speaking, the elite is 2%, people are 98%. So that is why we need people who are from there, who know the area. We try to address it also by having a lot of national staff in our missions. You can also think later on, we also try to have a lot of UN volunteers, both national and international. So it's not that volunteer has to be only international or only national. You can be an international volunteer, you can go to a mission. But generally speaking, we want people who have some experience, in the work, say 4 years or so before you can apply to become an international volunteer at least. So that is where we are. But yes, I agree fully with you that we need greater collaboration with regional organizations. I spoke in depth about African Union because most of the peacekeeping operations right now are in the African Union. But I have a very good cooperation. I have a letter of memorandum of understanding with an organization called OSCE. This is the Organization for Security in Europe. And its Secretary General is a person called Thomas, who is a good friend of mine. And so we have agreed that we have to work together in Europe. They are doing operations in places in Europe, and we try and work with them within our own mandates. For example, I don't have a mandate to work for Ukraine, so I cannot support them for Ukraine, but I support them for other areas. We have a similar relationship with NATO, even though it is a military body, but we have a relationship with them. Sometimes if we need them, we can use them. We have also a relationship with a corresponding body called CSTO, that is the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which is the sort of NATO counterpart, if you like, of Eastern Europe. We are trying to develop more cooperations, but it depends also on needs. So we don't have that much cooperation in Latin America because in Latin America we don't have that many operations right now.
Let me ask you, what are the critical unintended effects in peacekeeping?
I think this is a very important question. You see, one of the first principles of peacekeeping, which I've tried to introduce since I took over in DFS, but I also had this idea when I was head of a mission, when I was the deputy head of entire peacekeeping many years ago. I think the first principle has to be do no harm. And that means that we have to be conscious about the unintended effects of peacekeeping. The first and the most important unintended effect is what I call monetary inflation. Some of you who are students of economics or who have done a little bit of economics will understand the concept of elasticity. So if the supply is not elastic. That means supply of a good or service cannot be expanded quickly. But the demand is high. Then what it does is it creates monetary inflation. So suddenly, when a lot of peacekeepers come in with high purchasing power, then what happens is that something which was selling, maybe bread, which was selling for say $1, the next day sells for $3. What is the unintended effect? The unintended effect is that those who were less than $1, they could never buy bread. Okay, so on them there is no effect. I mean, we feel sad for them. We have to improve their condition, but this has no effect on them. But those who were between $1 and $3 suddenly fall below the poverty line because now the cost of the bread has become $3 instead of being $1. So we have to be very conscious not to promote so much of local purchase that it leads to more people falling below the poverty line or below the sustenance line. And that is why it will come as a shock to some of you. My department, they do good work, all of them. We provide food from outside. And we provide 4,500 calories per person per day, virtually double of what you people eat, because you eat normally, I think, 2,000, 2,500. Huh? So we provide double of that at a cost which will shock you. Hot meals, breakfast, lunch, dinner, 3 hot meals, some snacks, some tea, coffee, at a cost of $9 per person per day. It is difficult for you to get even 2 Mac burgers, in that price. And this we supply in far off locations, where nobody goes, where there is no system. But we keep on doing it. Why? Because we want to ensure that the local people do not have less to eat because we have sucked in all the requirements. Same applies to water. Let's say we are deployed in a place like Kidal. I made a decision there that nobody will get more than 40 liters of water per person per day. Why? Because if we will extract all the water from that center desert of Sahara, from that oasis, then after 20 years there will be no more water left, even if they will have security. But then they will fight because there will be no more water. So we have to be very careful about that. We have to be equally careful about our impact on environment. We have to be equally careful about also a third area, creation of dependency. That is why I personally do not like long peacekeeping operations which have continued over generations. Over generations means that there are people whose grandfathers were employed in peacekeeping operation in Democratic Republic of Congo, whose mothers were employed in the Democratic Republic of Congo operation, and whose daughters are now employed in the Democratic Republic of Congo operation. That is not a peacekeeping operation. That is a clutch. That is a dependency. So we need to avoid the dependency also. But not too quick, because I made a mistake. I was a deputy special representative in Timor-Leste, and we were very confident in 2005 that, okay, now it is already all right, but we had not followed the test of first national election. So, and that is why I included that first national election in my success factor. So we called it a day. I went to become director of the Nehru Center, the Indian Cultural Ambassador to the world at large in London. And within 14 months, I had received a request from then Secretary General Kofi Annan to return back to Timor-Leste, this time as the head of the mission, because it had sort of re-entered the crisis. But then we organized the election in 2007. We had a functioning parliament in 2008. So in 2009 I left. 2011 we closed the mission. So that's where we are. But these are the 4 unintended consequences which we have to be very careful about. First is creation of monetary inflation, which has the adverse effect of pushing people down the sustenance line or below sustenance level when actually they could have been above sustainable level in the absence of a peacekeeping operation. Second is the impact of environment. Third is unsustainable withdrawal of natural resources, be it water or anything like that. And fourth is the creation of dependency. One last point, which I've been making to all colleagues, and I want to make it to you. If you ever go to a peacekeeping operation, I know that some of you in your house, you will have to buy small gen sets, or you will have to buy small solar powers to make it more environmentally friendly, because you will not get the electricity like here, no? Okay, fine. I have no problem. Buy it, do it. You need to have some comfort in your house. But please share it with your neighbors. If you don't share it, then you come and tell me, neighbors are throwing stone at me. Obviously, they will throw stone at you. You know, every whole locality is in the dark. Your UN employee house is glittering with television and light. Obviously, they will throw stone. What else they will do with it? So I think we need to have a social conscience. So these are some of the points which I think are important when we look at unintended consequences and how to deal with them. So we have to live, in some cases, not exactly like they live. I'm not saying that if they are fighting, we should fight, no. But at least, for example, in Kidal, now people didn't follow my advice to restrict themselves to 40 liters of water. So I believe a lot in technology, and I have other things up my sleeve. I put in a mechanism in the shower. That you press the shower button, because there is no tap to turn. You press the shower button, you get for water for 1.5 minutes. Then, okay, people said that they kept on pressing it. So I made it like this, that if you press it more than 5 times, after that it stops. Then it will only open after 24 hours. So in fact, we even looked at possibilities in Western Sahara. You know, we have an operation there in Western Sahara, in Morocco, where also water is a problem because it's Sahara. So we said, you know, how do people who stay in space for hundreds of days, you know, people who go to the moon, people who stay in the space station, how do they live? I mean, they cannot be taking water, they cannot take water from here. How much water can they carry? They carry what is known as dry bath. It is a sort of an equipment, it is a powder, aerosol, you know, so you put it on your body and it cleans it off of the germs, just wipe it off. So we tried it in Western Sahara, it succeeded. We tried it in Mali, people didn't like it, so because there is also social acceptance, you know. Just because there is technology, it doesn't mean that it gets accepted. So, but we keep on looking at all these options to decrease the unintended consequences as much as we can. As I said, that is why if there is elasticity of supply, for example, for food, then I want to buy locally. Why? Because it will promote local development, local industry, local slaughterhouses, whatever. But if there is no elasticity of supply, I don't want to create a monetary inflation. So we have to keep on thinking about it. Same for water. If we find that we can create, we created this in South Sudan, even in Kidal and Gao in central Mali, I've told people to create. It's not that it doesn't rain. It rains. It rains, but it rains only for 7 to 14 days, and all that water goes to waste because there is really, in that heat, it evaporates or it gets into the sand. So we need to create aquifers. We need to create mechanisms for ensuring that the water goes into the subsoil reservoir and then it can recharge it, and then we take from the subsoil reservoir only what is sustainable. That means calculate the recharge rate, take what is what can be sustained, that means the equal to the recharge rate or less than the recharge rate, and then let the rest of the water remain. So these are type of things which we have to keep on thinking. You will think this is very far from peacekeeping, but no, we have to keep on thinking of this because we have to avoid. We also need to avoid one more unintended consequence, and which happens not only because of peacekeeping, also because of other reasons, and that is a spread of illnesses from one part to another where they were not known because of travel. You know, we have to be very worried about, for example, last year we were worried about Zika, you know, the illness which was spreading from Central America. But there are other illnesses which were not known in a particular area. For example, there is a illness called yellow fever. Now, yellow fever, the mosquito is everywhere. The mosquito which carries it is called Aedes. This mosquito is in USA also, this mosquito is in India also, but the virus which lives inside the mosquito and creates the illness is only in Africa. So we must ensure that all the planes which go into Africa or come from Africa do not carry any mosquito from Africa with this illness, and that everybody who goes into Africa also does not return back with the virus in the blood. So they have to take immunization before they go into Africa, not after they come out, but before they go into Africa. So these are type of things which you keep on working on and looking at on how to avoid.
There are various stakeholders, and they have different standards for evaluating success. What standards frequently differentiate state from non-state actors?
I think non-state actors, really speaking, are those who most of the time benefit from the absence of security, absence of rule of law for their own purposes. Let's take the example of Mali. Who benefits from insecurity in central Mali? Who benefits from insecurity in northern Mali? Those who benefit from insecurity are the drug smugglers, are the cigarette smugglers, are the human traffickers who are taking people from rest of Africa into Europe, from Mali to Libya and Libya onwards. So we need to worry about these non-state actors. Similarly, who are the non-state actors who are creating problems in Democratic Republic of Congo? Essentially, people who are benefiting from the huge mineral and timber of that part of the world. You know, cobalt, a element which is ubiquitous now. You cannot produce a cell phone without cobalt. That is found there. It is the largest source of industrial diamonds. It is the largest source of nickel. It is the largest source of wood. So we have to worry about these things in Democratic Republic of Congo, the non-state actors. Who are the non-state actors in Somalia? So it depends. As I'm coming, as you can see, from western part of Africa toward the eastern part of Africa. Somalia, you can say there is nothing. So non-state actors, why? Not only because near to Somalia, you have the world's busiest maritime routes. Everything coming from the Malacca Straits, from Singapore, from India, from Japan, from New Zealand, from Australia towards Europe, has to pass near to the coast of Somalia. That is why we had the problem of piracy. But pirates don't live on the sea. They ultimately live on the land. And the insecurity, the lack of rule of law in Somalia benefits the pirates because then they live there. Of course, all these, to some extent, piracy, for example, was corrected with a European Union-led peace enforcement operation and with the efforts of the Somali government inside Somalia. Others, as also I said, are being corrected. But also, I believe that we need to work on ideology of the non-state actors who are indulging in terrorist acts. I do not believe personally that terrorists can be eliminated. You can have a terrorist who dies in an operation, unfortunate, or who is captured, even better. But terrorism as an ideology can be corrected only by education, jobs, mutual respect, tolerance, understanding of each other, and so on. And today, in fact, thank you for asking me this question, because I did want to refer, because today, while I'm not Jewish, but I respect all religions. I mean, I don't believe secular being has to be atheist. A secular, I think, to my mind, is believer in all religions in some form or other, including atheism. So today is the day of atonement for our Jewish colleagues, Yom Kippur, and that is what it is. Yom is the day, Kippur is atonement or cleaning. And I think the moment we realize, all of us, that we need to clean our hearts, we need to clean our surroundings, we need to be welcoming of the other, not distrustful of the other. I think the problem of terrorism might be solved. it is when we try to define terrorism as the other that we'll end up into bigger problems. Uh, but anyway, these are some of my personal thoughts. We'll see where we go. On state actors, I think the good part is that at least through the UN, to a certain extent, they agree on a common way forward. You know, that is how we get mandates from the Security Council for our operations, what is supposed to be achieved, what we are supposed to do. That is how we get the resources from the General Assembly for what we need to do, and then we report back to them. So at least people on a broad policy framework, the state actors are agreed. Can we do more on both sides? I think yes, we should. Should it be the job of a peacekeeping operation? I'm not so sure. And that is where I think I will stop on the terrorism issue. We support African Union, for example, which is fighting the Al-Shabaab, which is the group in Somalia, possibly with some links to ISIS and others, nobody knows. I also worry sometimes that there is a growing linkage between various terrorism groups across the world, but I don't have data to prove it. So that is only a sort of a personal worry which I have at this stage, not a fact.
If I may expand on this just for a moment, the non-state actors, such as NGOs, do you see any differentiation between their definition of success of your operations and what state actors would define?
Okay. I think that is a different question. Let me put NGOs. NGOs I don't put in the category of non-state actors, if you permit me. I put NGOs as what I call civil society actors, which are critical in any democracy. You know? So I think for civil society organizations, CSOs or NGOs, if you like, non-governmental organizations, or even for business organizations, which are also a component thereof, I think largely speaking, the criteria for success are more or less the same. Security for them to enable them to do what they need to do. Freedom for them to do what they need to do within the broad guidelines of the Constitution, which is the framing law of any country. And for those actors who are business organizations, the ability to make money for their shareholders and their partners. I mean, that is correct. There's nothing wrong in making money. That is why I am more concerned not about the taxation rate. For businesses, I have always been more concerned about stability of taxation rate, because if they have taken a decision based upon a 40% taxation rate and they know that they can still work that out, fine. The problem comes when the taxation rate one day is 10%, next day is 40%, the third day is 30%, then it becomes impossible to make a business calculation, you know. So that is why stability guaranteed through some system. There also cadastre, the land records, become very important. Because unless you have security that what you are trying to do or what you have rented is sufficiently legal, it's a problem. You know, for example, we had a challenge in Timor-Leste, and the leader there took a very good decision. Because the land before 1974 was in Portuguese records, in some different records. Then between 74 and 99, it was in Indonesian records. Then after 1999, nobody knew what records. So ultimately, we had to take some sort of a decision that state should indemnify the previous owner, because for the same piece of land, there were multiple owners depending upon whether it was Indonesian time or Portuguese time or the independence time. So you have to take a decision that, okay, everybody who is in possession now remain in possession and the rest be indemnified through some central system, you know. Otherwise, if you open up everything, then you will just keep on running court cases to no rhyme or reason. So I think these are type of things which we have to look at. But largely speaking, I believe the criteria for success for a state actor and for a civil society organization or a business organization, largely speaking, is the same.
I have one last question before we open
Yeah.
up to the Q&A. What changes would you like to see adopted for future UN peacekeeping operations?
It's a very difficult question, and thank you for asking it. I think the first principle, as you would have noticed by now, that I like to go back to basic principles and then try to make some connections to what we like to see. I think we cannot do peacekeeping in the 21st century with the tools of the 19th century. That is impossible, you know. Today, for example, even while we call it cavalry, you know, in military terms, nobody goes on horseback, no? In cavalry, by definition, it comes from the Greek word, it means horseback. But people are going on tanks, they are going on armored personal carrier, they don't go on horseback. It will make no sense. Similarly, when we talk of observation in today's world, I don't think we should talk about observation by having binoculars and people standing there. It doesn't work. I think we need to look at satellites, we need to look at technologies like hovermast, aeromast. I'm using them. In fact, hovermast, aeromast, we need to look at drones, we need to look at possibilities of even capturing the data, not eavesdropping on your conversation, but just capturing the data of cell phones. Because if we see lot of cell phone data moving from one, let's say, mobile tower to another, then we know that a large group of people is coming from one area to another. No? Why they are coming? Then we have to examine it. We have to find out. So signal intelligence, this is what called signal intelligence. So signal intelligence, technology, I think is very important. And there immediately we come into three challenges. One, you know, the technology of this type is not easy to find, except in member states. And that too, not in all member states, in few member states. So we have to work with them. But when we work with them, and even if they agree to share it with us, we are a universal organization. So I cannot say that this technology is coming from country X, and the country Y from Africa, who also has soldiers there, will not see this technology. How can I say that, you know? But then the country X does not want the country Y to see their technology. So we'll end up into a second problem. And the third problem which we'll end up into is a classical problem, not only of peacekeeping, but of everywhere else, what I call the human-technology interface. So technology cannot work. I mean, once I put a hover mast, you know, hover mast is, what is it? It is nothing. It is basically a very thick steel rope on top of which 300 feet high, you can put a helium balloon, and then you put a 360-degree cameras around it so that you can watch, you know, 6, 7, 10 miles with this camera. That is a hover mast. Or we have aero mast, you know, you put about 75 feet high steel rope, screw it on the back of a pickup truck, then you can take it wherever you want and see 2, 3 miles away from it. So in this hover mast, there was an attack once in that place. I will not mention the place. So there was an attack, and people started saying, oh, but the hover mast gave no warning. The hover mast doesn't give warning, you know. Somebody has to manage the output of the hover mast. You know, it's like saying air traffic control tower did not give any warning of collision or between two aircraft. Air traffic control tower will not give a warning. The air traffic controllers who are sitting in the tower will give a warning. If nobody is sitting there, then sorry, then nothing. You know? So I think this human-technology interface is a challenge, very big challenge, which we keep on working on. So we have now started, which is not really the work of my department, but I started it through help from Japan, Brazil, Switzerland, Thailand, and Israel, I think. We started a training program for engineers, for signal interception. So by now, I have trained about 4,000 people total, and they have been deployed in different peacekeeping missions after getting training from us. But that is not really the job of my department is operation support. It is not the training department, you know. But what to do? So we are looking at this type of challenge. Another challenge is Uh, and this, I think, we will rely on you, Professor Sam, and your students to come up with thoughts on this, is what I call a general atmosphere of distrust between the governed and those who govern. And this exists the world over. We are seeing it, in the street demonstrations now, recently, in many parts of the world. This general distrust creates a bigger problem for me because the UN, even though our charter starts "We the people," but the first article says "We the people," represented by whom? The member states. So we are one step removed, if you like, from direct contact with the people. So then there is greater distrust, because if there is distrust between those who are governed and those who are doing the governing, then we are one step removed as international organization. So people have even less trust in us. This lack of trust has to be addressed. And that is why I come out when I get an opportunity to speak to students, to speak to universities, because I think the role of academic institutions in ensuring that creation of trust again in the system is important. There, I would make also a third challenge, which is very important. Somehow, I feel we have now a lot of information on our fingertips. Bing, Yahoo, search on Google, search on something else. We have a lot of instant communication available, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, whatever else, new ones, what is it called? Minute, something. So we have lots of information available. But this information overload is also a challenge. Uh, I think we need to be careful about what I would call being drowned in information without gaining knowledge, or even if we gain knowledge without having the wisdom of how that knowledge is to be applied. Uh, let's take the example, the same knowledge of, uh, of a atomic fission can be used for a nuclear bomb, it can be used for a nuclear power plant. So knowledge does not ipso facto imply wisdom. Uh, and after having wisdom, to have the humility to accept that other people's wisdom may be slightly different from ours, and let's discuss it out. So these four challenges I find, which I find as life challenges today. I mean, I don't find them only as peacekeeping challenges, but they become more acute in peacekeeping, because in peacekeeping we do not have the structures. In other places, at least some structures are there. So the structures take care of becoming the shock absorbers. But in peacekeeping, there is no structure in that country, and then we have more problems.
Thank you. I'd like to open up to the audience. If you have any questions, please raise your hand, and we have a microphone. Yes?
Ram Kishan, I would like to ask a couple of questions. First of all, I thank you for a very enlightening exposition of the various issues of the what I feel following problems for the UN and also the international system as a whole. One, there are some hot spots where possibility of conflict or war can come. For instance, South China Sea, North Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, the war in Yemen, and these are some of the problems I think which are there. What can the UN do to minimize the possibility of such conflicts? Because there was earlier by the proposal to have preventative diplomacy and intelligence to solve international problems. The other problem I see, which is pretty serious, is the failing and failed states. How to stabilize them so that the conflict there doesn't spill over and create problems for the other. This is the second question. Third question is, I find in the present situation there is a trend of uh, national resurgence. It's not a bad thing as such, but when it leads to uh, less cooperation to solve collective problems, then it becomes an impediment. And the fourth, about peacekeeping, I was thinking, and in general, like revival of the military staff committee and other matters, and the effectiveness of the UN system as a whole through reform, greater funds, etc. These are my questions. So, what I would like to ask you.
Okay.
I think all four questions are very critical. I will not be in a position to answer all of them, but I will try to answer some. While I will not comment upon individual situations of any place or any part of the world, I want to tell you about the way in which the system currently works. The Security Council has to make a decision based upon the advice or any issue which the Secretary General can bring to the attention of the Security Council, which is Article 93, or with the Security Council takes note of it on its own, which it can always do because it has been given the task under the Charter to work for maintenance of international peace and security. Till such time that mandating happens, the Secretariat is in no position to do anything. Secretary General's good offices, on the other hand, remain always available. And Secretary General has also established actually a very high-powered team, which includes, in fact, for that matter, the former president of Timor-Leste, which I mentioned, Nobel Peace Prize winner, Jose Ramos Horta, and several others of that stature, to act on his behalf, to help in the mediation. On preventive diplomacy, apart from this group which had been established by the Secretary General, my colleague Department of Peace Building and Political Affairs, keeps on working to try and intervene, to try and assist the countries to find solutions of their challenges to the extent that we can. And there are many areas where we will not hear. In fact, actually, I have a gradation in my own mind. I believe that the greatest success of the preventive diplomacy is when people don't even know that there was a crisis. The second success is when people know that there was a crisis, but they don't know how it was solved. But it was solved. The third success is when people know that there was a crisis, that it was solved, and it was solved with national efforts, although we know that the national efforts were helped by outsiders. And the fourth and the last success is when people know that there was a crisis, that it was solved with national efforts supported by outsiders. That is the fourth success, not the first success to my mind. And of course, when it is not solved, it is not solved. So there are many areas where I think preventive diplomacy is succeeding. I will not go into that for obvious reasons, but it is succeeding. Coming to the issues of reform of the UN, I think there are two major areas which are being looked at. One is, of course, the reform of the Security Council, and the countries have been working on it. And the second is revitalization of the General Assembly. General Assembly is a universal body. Security Council, Economic and Social Council are limited bodies, if you like. They act on behalf of the General Assembly. They are charter bodies, but limited in number. This work, I think, will have to go on as we go along. But in between, the Secretary General decided to do something which he can always do. So now, for example, my department, which used to be Department of Field Support, is no longer field support, it is operational support. So we look at the world at large. We are no longer looking only at the 17 countries where peacekeeping operations are deployed or another 14 where special political missions are deployed. We are looking at the entire world. Wherever any support is required, we are there, we are available. So I think we have made changes to make the UN more agile, more rapid, more effective, more efficient. Uh, and I think we'll have to continue on that path. There is no solution which I find other than continuing on the path. On the issue of, or let's say the broader issue which you mentioned of resources, right now we are in a very difficult situation in the UN, very difficult. I am facing not what I call a budgetary crisis, I am facing what I call a liquidity crisis. And let me take you a few moments to explain that. In fact, I was grateful for whomsoever, I think, Deanne, your university, and maybe the student union, for having taken care of my transport from the office to here. Otherwise, I would have said, sorry, we will do it by VTC. I'm doing many things by video teleconference now. Liquidity crisis comes because UN cannot print its own money. We are not an organization, we are not a state. So I can only have money which is given to me by member states. Now, any member state which gives its payment not on 1st of January, but which gives its payment in October, but if I have expenditure in September, then that money in October doesn't help me, no? In fact, I can tell you, there are some buildings which I rent. My department also rents buildings, that maintains the big UN headquarters which you visit, maintains the rentals in addition to that UN headquarters. I didn't pay the rent to the New York people in September. I told them I cannot even pay you in October. So in November we will pay. But think of it. We are talking about rentals which run into $2.7 million a month. So I think we have a problem not only of adequacy of resources, we have a problem of getting resources at the right time. So if we don't get it at the right time, you can say, oh, but I paid my full amount in 1st of December. But 1st of December doesn't help me for September, October, and November, no? So these are the type of challenges which we are facing. We are dealing with it. The Secretary General has sent a letter to all the member states. So let me hope that it will work. But for example, just to give you one example, we are now closing the building at 6 o'clock. I have no more building to heat or to in off office hours, so as to say.
Time for
A few others, yeah.
one more question?
I didn't want to steal time from the student though, but I can't help myself. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you so much for coming and speaking with us today. Really enlightening. I'm Ben Freer, professor of psychology, director of the University Core program here on the Metro campus, fellow director from the Forum campus, Karen Sharma here as well. I have a comment and then a question. The comment is, I was so glad to hear you talk about the importance of cultural diversity and respecting a variety of perspectives, and how challenging that must be in the context of peacekeeping. And so in that vein comes my question. I'm also the co-chair of the NGO Committee on the Family in New York, and I'm curious as to how you balance rights of family members and instability in the family in cultures where rights of women might not be the same as what the UN espouses as kind of their preferred gender equality stance, or the rights of children and the safety of children. So how does peacekeeping address the issue of when they're brought in to deal with a national peacekeeping effort, but we have internal strife within the family component that needs to be addressed but wasn't the goal of bringing you in? Is that something that is seen as too micro and so is not the role of peacekeeping? Or is it something that's seen as a requirement to develop a peaceful nation, enabling the overall success of the mission?
I think I can do no better than repeat the words of I have many teachers, antecedent teachers. You know the concept of antecedent teacher, because from Socrates, if I picked up something, then he's my antecedent teacher through many people. So since war and hatred starts in the minds of men and women, therefore peace first and foremost to my mind has to be cultivated in the minds of men and women. Now, my respect for cultural diversity has to be tempered with the fact that there are certain universal norms which have been accepted by all. There is only one country which is a non-signatory to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. 192 signatories are already there, So we cannot say that no, sorry, we will provide marriage to the girls at the age of 11 and to the boys at the age of 13. No, sorry, no, this is not allowed. No? This is I cannot be. I'm impartial as a peacekeeper, but I cannot be impartial between, if you like, non-respect for fundamental rights, for human rights, and culture. No, culture has to change. You accepted it in the rights of the child, in the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action for Human Rights, in the Beijing Platform Action, and I mean, we can go all the way. So I think we need to create mechanisms, and that is why peacekeeping tries, when they are developing police, to inculcate gender sensitivity, to inculcate special mechanisms for domestic violence. After all, you cannot be impartial. I mean, there is no culture in the world which can what should I say, condone domestic violence. I mean, no. And I say domestic violence because I'm not saying that only men hitting women. I mean, women also hitting men. I mean, I count domestic violence. So, but most of the time it is men hitting women rather than vice versa. And I think we need to be very gender sensitive. I'm very. I want to tell you something which I decided on my own. And today, of course, I see all these students. But I have left meetings if I have found that there is not a single woman in the meeting. I say sorry. This meeting, it can go on for all I care, but it will not have my participation therein. We need to look at women participation in the peace negotiations. We know it not only to look at women participation in the peace negotiations, we need to look at, once I did a bit of a study, it's not really a study, it's more of my own anecdotal experience. How much time the women have to speak in a meeting if compared with the time which men take. And the results are not pleasing. Or how many women's issues are reflected in a peace document. Results are not very good. So I think these are things which we keep on looking at. I agree with you. And we need to change the psychology. I tell you a story again about Timor-Leste. They wanted to honor the freedom fighters. I went with the president, we were on them together. And suddenly found all men. So I said, where are the women? No, but women were not fighting. I said, no, sorry, that's a wrong impression. Somebody was providing food to your fighters, somebody was hiding them, somebody was bearing the brunt of the occupation. Where are they? So then finally we had a new commission. We said, okay, now we have to get the women who should also be honored for their contribution. Contribution is not only taking the gun. So I agree with you.
Hi, I'm Steven. So when peacekeeping forces are deployed to different locations around the world, are there instances of cultural conflict? And also, what are some of the most important lessons learned about cultural sensitivity from previous peacekeeping operations?
I think the most important lesson on cultural sensitivity would be related to the fact that as I said, that peacekeepers have to understand that they should not become part of the problem. They should become part of the solution. In order to become part of the solution, you have to realize your own limitations. That is the first step in sensitivity. Once you realize your limitations, then you can interact with others. But so long as you think that you know everything and you have come there to teach, then that is not going to work. On the first question which you had, and I will just say a few words. I think we need to be very conscious of continuous balance, and that balance will be found at different times, at different levels, on how to promote further improvement and development without creating excessive strife. But we have to acknowledge that without strife of some sort, there will be no improvement. So this is the balancing act which we have to, through our own efforts, promote. So that is when we come to command and control. There are problems of command and control every time, everywhere. But UN peacekeeping is not an occupying force. It is a force for stabilization. So we should always work in collaboration, in cooperation, in support, in assistance. And that sometimes becomes a challenge because people come with ideas of how the forces worked in Iraq, and I said, sorry, I mean, Iraq was a different case. No, Iraq, you had control over the airspace. Here, the airspace over Mali is civilian airspace. It is not your airspace, for you to decide whenever you will take off. No, you have to check with the SECNA before you will take off. I also have challenges, and these are challenges because sometimes, or let me put it, not challenge, the opportunity. I think the opportunity is that peacekeeping relies first and foremost not on military power. It relies first and foremost on the primacy of the political solution to the conflict. The military power is to be used to obtain the breathing space for that political solution to emerge. But it cannot be a military solution. You can never have a military solution to a conflict. I mean, that history will prove you. If you look at history, what did the Treaty of Westphalia produce? The Treaty of Westphalia produced the First World War. What did the First World War produce? The Second World War. So, I mean, let's be reasonable. Military solutions are not, they may give you an impression of a solution, but ultimately they are not long lasting.
I'm Kiran Sharma, and my question is, you explained very clearly about what your goals are when you go and the point when the exit point comes. But on the pragmatic side, on the starting point, it's quite complex to establish the current state of affairs with so many players in a place where there is enormous turmoil. So could you just guide us how you make those decisions about the current state and where and what your pathway is to the final exit point from there?
You're right. And frankly, I think we are not very good at it. That is why we have proposed as the UN Secretariat to the Security Council to consider a new mechanism. We call it a two-step mandating process. That first you give a mandate that yes, you agree that there should be a peacekeeping operation in a particular place. Then give us 6 months. We will go, we will find out, we will study. Then we will come back to you saying that, okay, this is the situation, and this is what needs to be done, this is what we can achieve. So we consider a two-step mandating process. But this two-step mandating process is still under the consideration of the member states, not yet adopted. But I do believe that a two-step mandating process would help in what you are saying. In a way, sometimes this two-step mandating process is implemented by default. Because in 2005, when we declared that, okay, we now no longer need peacekeeping in Timor-Leste, we need only a small UN office called UNOTAL, I left, I went to London, and then we had a problem. So we knew the situation, what had caused the problem. And then we returned there in 2006, and by 2011, we were out again successfully. So sometimes this two-step mandating process is implemented involuntarily, unfortunately at the cost of the country concerned, because so many people died in Timor-Leste during that crisis, and the country was set back by a year and a half, let's say. But that's where we are.
I think we've reached the end, and I'd like to show a round of appreciation for
Thank you.
Khare.
And thank you for your questions and for leading the discussions.
And I'd like to invite you to the food and festivity in the
Thank you.
back.
Thank you. And thank you to all the students and the participants.